the Board Governance Committee meeting. And the first order of business is roll call, please. Ms. Hopper.
Henry Jones,
Here.
Rob Beckner,
Young,
Good morning.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Present.
Lisa Middleton,
Present.
Stacy Oliveris,
Here.
Michelle Mitchell for Irena Ortega,
Here.
Jason Perez.
Here.
okay, thank you, Ms. Hopper. The next item on the agenda is approval of the June 17, 2020 Board Governance Committee timed agenda. Do I have a motion?
All motion.
Motion by Mr. Perez,
Second.
second by Mr. Rufino. Roll call, Ms. Hopper?
Rob Beckner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Michelle Mitchell for Irena Ortega,
Aye.
Jason Perez.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have Jason Perez making the motion, Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma seconding it, and all ayes.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the executive report. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, good morning, committee members and other board members. We have a pretty straightforward agenda this morning. There's only one substantive matter, and that is item 5A, which is some proposed revisions to the board travel policy. So with that, I'll just get out of the way and let you get to it, or let us get to it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move to that action consent items. I need a motion on the action consent items.
So move.
Moved by Ms. Middleton,
Second.
second by Mr. Fechner. A roll call, Ms. Hopper.
Henry, I'm trying to make a comment.
I have a comment too.
On the minutes? On the, okay, so go ahead, Mr. Perez.
I just got confused. I'm sorry, are we on the minutes or on the new
We're on
policy?
the action consent, which is the minutes
Then never mind.
and the delegation. There's two items there.
Well, withdraw my question.
Okay, Ms. Brown, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I do have a question on the delegation of authority.
Okay,
I'm
Ms.
actually,
Brown.
thank you. I'm looking at the first page under general item number 6. And it says that the CEO will report to the board on at least a monthly basis all significant action the CEO has taken under this delegation of authority. So I'm wondering how that's happening now in lieu of that we're not meeting monthly, and how is that kind of happening?
Ms. Frost.
Yes, so significant actions, other than what's been asked through committee delegation, which would be put into the insight tool. Significant actions would also be reported again through the dashboard that's now available in the insight tool. That will be refreshed monthly. If there are items between meetings that do occur, you either get a board note from the CEO or the CEO, me, is in contact regularly with the board president and the board vice president.
Thank you for the answer. The question I have is I want to make sure it's monthly. And also, if you're only telling a few board members, you're not reporting to the board. You're only reporting to a few. So I want to make sure that the report goes to all the board members.
Yes, and the channel or the format that we will use is the insight tool, which was intentionally designed to be monthly updates.
Yeah.
Thank you. As long as I have your assurances that's happening. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now the vote, please, on that.
Okay, and this is for both 4A and 4B, right, Mr. President?
Yes.
Okay. Rob Beckner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Aye.
Michelle Mitchell for Irena Ortega,
Aye. I'm sorry, I'm having computer issues.
no problem, thank you. Jason Perez.
Aye.
Mr. President, I have Lisa Middleton making the motion, Rob Beckner seconding it. I have all ayes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we will move to the action agenda item. The proposed revisions to the board travel policy, travel reporting, and approval process. Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, thank you. Let me set the table for the committee. This item continues the discussion of potential changes to the board travel policy. As you may recall, the committee tasked the legal office with reviewing the transcripts of the committee's prior discussions on this issue and try to capture a consensus in some amendments to the existing travel policy. So we did that, then we worked on that draft with the chair, Mr. Jones, and the vice chair, Ms. Middleton. We made some revisions, and what you have for you is what we arrived at. There are two basic changes. The first one would expand the reporting of the educational and other travel. It would require a concise written report of any such travel within 30 days of that travel, except, of course, board and constituent meetings. The reports would be posted as part of a standing agenda item at each board meeting. And then we would give board members an opportunity to expand on their reports orally at the meeting, and the public an opportunity to comment on those reports. It expands the potential consequences of failing to comply with this requirement to a denial of reimbursement of the travel expenses. The second change would require board members to obtain the president's prior approval for any travel within California, including events within California that have registration fees under $500. The existing policy does not require this approval for travel within California or events within California under $500. So with this change, all travel within California, whether or not it involves a registration fee, would require the president's approval. This agenda item would also clarify, this change would also clarify that travel approval is required for speaking engagements that require travel. So with that overview of the agenda item, I will hand it back to you, Mr. Jones, for discussion with your colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jacobs. And I know you said it, but I just want to reiterate that this does not require the president's approval to meet with constituents or CalPERS related business at the office or other CalPERS sites throughout the state. Okay, we have a number of questions. Ms. Brown, you're on mute.
I think Mr. Jones was first. My comment was on delegation. I mean, I think Mr. Perez was next.
Oh, okay. Okay, so then Mr. Perez.
Thank you. Mr. President, let me start by saying I absolutely believe in transparency. Everyone whom we meet, the stakeholders, and everyone should be able to see who we meet and why we're meeting them. However, I think, respectfully, sir, I think this is an overreach of your authority. I know you're asking for this authority, but I think it's a really bad idea. Um, your question right now to Mr. Jacobs in regarding to meeting with stakeholders, that's contrary to what it says in the highlight under B, travel requests and approval. It doesn't say anything about stakeholders there. It does mention it again below, but there's a couple instances in this document where it's contrary to itself. Another example would be the exceptions of board member travel after it's been, before it's been submitted. You have in there that there will not be paid out, but then you mentioned, or the document, excuse me, mentions that there are exceptions. Lastly, I don't think it's up to the board or anybody on the, it's not up to the president or anyone else on the board with whom we meet. Seeking your approval is just, I don't think it's right.
Well, but first of all, on your comment, you look at item F under procedures and the highlighted changes. It's the fourth paragraph. It does say expenses and in parentheses with the exception of meetings notified by the board and constituent meetings with members. So it is highlighted in the document that's not part of the required. And I think to your broader question, I think that there has to be someone responsible for an organization, whether it's 2 members, 5 members, or 6 members. You can't, I don't believe it's prudent to not have someone responsible. And that's why the board has delegated that authority to the president of the board and the vice president when it's the president who is traveling to be responsible for the institution. So I believe that someone needs to be responsible, and it seems to me the appropriate place is the president.
But you don't have that authority now. You're asking for that authority. So
The only change, I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You don't have that authority now. You're asking for that authority.
The only thing that I'm asking for that's different than the prior policy is that it's less than $500 and in the state of California. All the other policies were there before.
Right.
And the reason,
I think...
and the reason that's there is because when the stakeholders requested that we have a public forum on our travel and information to provide for the public for transparency purposes, I thought it was prudent before we just go and make that one policy change, we needed to review what our current practices are and determine whether or not there are other changes that should be made. And as a result of that review, we found that the less than $500 in in-state travel did pose a problem for staff processing reimbursement because that was not sufficient information. So that's why we've added that provision.
All right, well, this strikes a chord with me specifically, sir, because last month I had put in a, not a request for travel because I don't need approval in the state of California. I put it in through the portal just so I can get my room squared away, and it was denied by you. You gave me a good answer saying that it was because it was outside the scope of the government, the governor's orders of the COVID. And I provided back to you examples of why that would be exempt. And that meeting was with another board member in Sacramento, and you still denied it. Again, this is not a tit for tat by any means. I'm saying that the board president should not have that kind of authority to deny someone travel in the state of California under $500.
And you're correct, Mr. Perez, that I did disapprove that because it wasn't according with the governor's executive order, and it was considered only essential travel. And to meet with a board member, I thought and believed that that could have been done on the phone, and that was not fall under the category of essential travel at that time. And so that's why I declined that. Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Perez?
Not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that the current board policy provides a wonderful opportunity for board members to engage with stakeholders, whether they be retired, working, or public agencies worried about increasing pension obligations. Who's shuffling papers?
Oh,
No,
I'm sorry.
no board member has ever needed the president's permission to visit such exotic California destinations like Bakersfield, Chula Vista, El Centro, Eureka, Fresno, Glendale, Hanford, Hollister, Modesto, Redding, Salinas, or Susanville. Actually, Susanville's quite lovely. But we've never needed your permission to attend those. And I don't understand why we need to change that policy now. Um, you're saying it doesn't apply to constituents? And so I have a concern though. If a constituent invites you to speak, does that become a speaking engagement? But there's no reason to change this. I don't travel internationally. I don't go to Singapore and I don't go to Australia. If you want to set a limit because there's a financial reason, I think that's a great idea. But but just to say that I have to get your permission to go to Reading to speak to a group of people, I think is a complete overreach. We are either elected or appointed board officials. Are you going to do this to the state controller or the state treasurer? All this would apply to them as well. And I think it's a huge overreach. It shouldn't happen. If there's a problem with processing reimbursements, then take care of the paperwork problem. Thank you.
And Ms. Brown, it does not, all of those cities that you mentioned where you're meeting with your stakeholders does not require my approval of the board president, because it's not Henry Jones, it's the board president, whoever happens to be in the seat.
The problem is you give no criteria and you don't give so give me an example of a speaking engagement that's under $500 that you would need to approve.
Well, there's one coming up in Napa that I was invited to speak, could be on a panel. And that was not a constituent meeting, and they wanted me to participate in the panel. So in that regard, I would have to get Ms. Taylor's approval to serve on that panel.
And what criteria will you use to determine whether or not you get to go or don't get to go?
And I'm not I'm not deciding you have listed the reasons for going, and I don't see me disapproving you for going to participate in a on a panel of anything like that. As I mentioned, the problem is that we cannot get information based on when you have traveled, in terms of providing the necessary information so that paper can be processed appropriately. So it's
It appears to be a paperwork problem, not a governance policy problem. Thank you.
okay. We have that's a comment. Those are public speakers that have a comment here. Miss Wesley. No, Miss Taylor, I'm sorry. Miss Taylor.
Don't forget me.
Okay, you, I don't see you.
Yeah,
on
Rob's
here, Rob.
first. Rob's
Okay,
first.
okay, go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. President. I tend to align myself and agree with what Mr. Perez said, but I do want to focus on one piece, because in B, it does not talk about the constituents. You have to go to F to find that. And I think that would clarify better if it was in B. But beyond that, I think what we're all getting hung up on is that word approval. Perhaps if we took out approval and made a prior notification instead, we're not asking for your approval, but we want you to know where we're going so that if the public asks, that it can be tracked. I think that makes a lot more sense than asking for approval to go to something that we don't need approval to go to. But prior notification to me makes sense, because then everyone knows who's going where, what you're doing, who you're speaking to, so that it can be tracked and then looked at again. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Miss Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I agree that we do probably need to mention it in B as well. I was looking for it. I didn't really see it there. So, and I think getting hung up on approval, yeah. I mean, in California stakeholder meetings that we all attend, I don't notice those because I go based on my union, so I don't even charge CalPERS. So, um, so that's a different thing. But I think what we all have to be careful of is when we are going to whatever stakeholder meetings we're going to, if we're members of those organizations, we have to make sure that we're not going as a member of the organization, which is why I have SEIU pay for my travel for stakeholders versus CalPERS. So I think that's if we're looking at just saying notification, I'm not sure that covers whether or not, like I say I want to go see DMV offices in Laguna Niguel or something, and I put that as a CalPERS thing. Henry can deny me because that's an SEIU expense. So I think we have to be cognizant of all of us have constituents. We are also members of those constituent groups. Maybe not, not all of us, but so I think that's where we have to be careful, and that does require approval because if Henry knows I'm going to go see a DMV office, well, those are my employees. CalPERS shouldn't be paying for that. So that's my statement. But again, I will agree with Rob and Jason that we need to move some more language over under B.
Okay. Okay. We have Miss Wesley.
No, that was an error. I don't have.
Okay.
Mr. President, I have a question.
Okay, Miss Oliveris.
Thank you. I'd like to get some more clarification on this. I think the first question I have, and again, I'm still rather new to the board, is how do we define constituent? Because I didn't see that anywhere in the policy.
Well, constituent could be, I mean, even though we're each of us are elected, those of us that are elected by a unique group, but I perceive all members are constituents, whether it's from the schools or whether it's from a state or whether it's a retiree, all those of our constituents. So I interpret the constituent to mean any member of CalPERS, those organizations that have members that are part of CalPERS are constituents.
Thank you for clarifying that. And do these proposed changes to the travel policy only apply if a reimbursement is sought?
Yes, because if you're not traveling on CalPERS business, then we all travel on our own. Just like Mr. Perez said that he was going to do some personal travel and didn't involve CalPERS. So you're not getting approval for that because it's not CalPERS related. Mr. Jacobs, do you have any comment on that?
The fidelity of the sound in the auditorium today is really quite horrible. So I'm not sure I heard the question.
I'm happy to repeat it.
Repeat it, Ms. Oliver.
Of course. So, Mr. Jacobs, I'm unclear as to whether these proposed changes to the travel policy apply only if reimbursement is sought, or if pre-approval would be required even if a board member is not seeking reimbursement. Could you please clarify that?
Sure. These only apply if you're seeking reimbursement. However, there are in other places requirements with respect to speaking on behalf of CalPERS. So if you're thinking, I want to go and speak on behalf of CalPERS, or I want to represent CalPERS at an item, and I want to pay for myself, that may trigger a different notification or approval requirement anyway. Now, I don't happen to, I can get that information, or I can point out where in the board governance policy that is. I just don't happen to have the sites at the top of my head, but I think that's kind of might be what you're getting at.
To some extent, Mr. President, is the goal of these proposed changes to increase transparency? And if so, I'm trying to understand why these would only apply if seeking reimbursement. So let me give you an example. So I often meet with investment funds. That's my role. And or other pension funds who have questions, right? And so we often talk about other CIOs. So we'll talk about what's happening in the markets overall and investment opportunities, et cetera. And sometimes they'll have questions. And there's often questions regarding what I do during my day job and then CalPERS. And so I often don't submit for investment. And so here I'm just trying to understand what the parameters are, because to me, the definitions aren't very clear.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So I want to make sure that I'm not out of bounds too, as this is proposed, because I typically don't submit for reimbursement if it's within California. But now as I read this, I'm like, well, wait, if I get in a Q&A session where I'm speaking at an event and it's not supposedly CalPERS related or a CalPERS constituent, but I end up answering questions, have I then inadvertently violated policy because I didn't submit for pre-approval? There's a lot of potential confusion here.
yeah. I understand what you're saying, because I take meetings that I don't request reimbursement either. It's just that they want to meet and ask, what's the process of making an investment through our investment proposal system, et cetera. That's not something that I request a reimbursement for. And in your case, it's you have the latitude to meet with whoever you want. And it could be, if you're asking whether or not it's related to CalPERS business, then if you are, depending on where you're traveling to or what if you're requesting to travel to another city and you're requesting reimbursement, then that becomes a CalPERS item. But if you are traveling related to your other job and you happen to be asked questions about CalPERS, that's totally different.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm still not sure I follow, but let's go ahead and move on to the other question.
Okay. Okay, we see. Okay, I don't think I see any other. Ms. Brown, is that a repeat or that's
No,
heard?
I have a question.
Okay, Ms. Brown.
Yeah. So I shared this policy with my attorney, and he's informed me that the policy looks like if you don't get approval, you can't go. That's the way he read the policy. Whether you want reimbursement or not. But I do agree with the idea of notifying the board president where we're going. That's already the policy. We're supposed to notify Karen Perkins and Henry Jones when we are going to a constituent meeting. So she puts it on the calendar so she knows who meets with who. We're already supposed to be doing that. If you're not doing that, then you're not following, it's not a policy, it's a practice, or maybe it's a procedure, but we're already supposed to be doing that. So I don't see any reason to change this. And I will agree with some of my members on the board that, yes, we meet with taxpayers or other associations. And if they're nearby, there's no reason to request a reimbursement. If you're already there for another reason, I don't request a reimbursement for that. But we should, in fact, notify. I agree. We should notify at least the staff and tell them who we met with, so you have an idea of what we're doing. But I don't know how clear the policy is, and it's kind of interesting because constituents, taxpayers are our constituents because they're paying through their taxes the state's obligations for pensions. So it's very, very confusing. I don't think we need to change the policy. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Milton.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank all of my colleagues for their comments. To my knowledge, the motivation behind this was to improve the practices around reporting to make it easier for the board travel unit to process claims, and one of transparency, so that all of our travel was identified. So I think Mr. Fechner and some others have made a good point that notification may be adequate as opposed to approval. It would certainly be an interim step that we could try to see if that makes some improvements in our processes, and I could accept that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else before we go to the, and I could accept that too, because what I'm trying to achieve is the improvement in the processes, because as I mentioned before, they're, looking at a review of some reports, it was like 64% of the time that reimbursement claims were filed with staff, there was a lack of explanation. So that's what I'm trying to deal with, is to, as Ms. Milton mentioned, is to make sure that we have the information for staff when they're processing your claims, that it ties back into the purpose of that travel in the first place. So approved notification, I'm not, torn with that. I just think that we need to work on something to improve that process. So that's my viewpoint on that. So, Mr. Fenton, you have another question? Or that's an old one.
I do, but Mr. Perez is in front of me.
Okay. I don't see Mr. Go ahead, Mr. Perez. I don't see you here.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay.
There's mentions of fixing the process several times, and I don't quite understand. Now that you mentioned an audit, what I would hate to do is make a blanket policy change because we have a couple or several board members that are failing to complete the appropriate paperwork. So if that's the case, perhaps we should just fix, fix those people that are committing the errors. And me, I'm sorry.
Okay, Mr. Fechner?
Yes, I'm ready to make a motion, Mr. President, if you're ready.
Wait a minute. We have another question, Mr.
Yes.
Fechner.
Very good.
Good, Ms. Oliveris.
Thank you. So sorry, I'm still trying to get clarification here, but so I understand now it's more of a reporting issue where the board services unit doesn't have the information it needs. Is that correct?
That's one of, yeah.
Then perhaps we could explore some type of like reporting portal, or within our travel portal, we have fields to fill out, because I think here it mentions providing a synopsis, but maybe it's more a page in which we enter who we met with, what the topic of discussion was, location, miles, that type of thing. So we have a format for reporting that can be consistent.
That's certainly, yeah, okay. We have several people from the public that wish to speak. Mr. Fechner, Teresa, you wanted, before you make a motion, Ms. Taylor.
Hi, sorry. Thanks, Mr. President. So I think we're all getting hung up on stuff, but I think what it is so staff has to have a reason that they're approving the money, right? And it goes to the state of California, don't forget. And we have been audited. I got audited for a taxi ride that had extra fees on it, so for travel. So I mean, I think we have to be aware that we're not the only ones that look at our board travel. The reason has to be on the request. Stacy, it's not a bad idea to put it in the portal. The synopsis is different. That's what our constituents asked for. I think it was the retiree asked for, hey, if you guys went to the CII or series event in Washington, D.C., can you guys give us a report? And so that's fine. That's part of this new thing. But then in addition, I just want to also say that it's imperative that we clarify that we're traveling for the appropriate reason. So if you're, I got denied because I was going to Harvard TLF for, I was on the planning committee, basically. It's not a board or anything, a planning committee. That is not something they should pay for. I didn't realize that. Okay. So, and these things, so you're saying approval and notification, but it's eventually, if it's an incorrect travel, it's going to get approved. If we're not saying that even under $500, and like I said earlier, and the example I'm using is for myself, but it has happened with some of our other board members. I'm going to a constituent meeting of whom I'm a member, like SEIU Local 1000, and I got SEIU to pay for it, and then I'm trying to put in a claim with CalPERS. That's the transparency we're looking for. So, and that's the problem we're running into, and I think we need to be clear on that. So,
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so are there any other questions from board members before I go to the public request to speak? Seeing none, Mr. Fox, you have people that are in the queue?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have a total of 6 individuals. First up, we have Cathy Jepsen.
Okay.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. Cathy
Yes, we can.
Immediate past, thank you, Henry. Immediate past president of the Association of Retired Emeritus Faculty at Cal State University, Northridge. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. I believe that the chair and the vice chair of the CalPERS board have a difficult, demanding, and time-consuming role. And personally, I think that Henry Jones and Teresa Taylor are doing a great job in their roles. The reason that I am opposed to the second part of this action item is that it has the appearance, and I underline the word appearance, of the chair and the vice chair, if the chair is not available, of micromanaging board members. And I don't think that that is what they're trying to do, but I think it's the process that needs to be changed. One of the board members' duties of all of the board is to meet and consult with constituents. And when I read this originally prior to this discussion, it looked to me that if it was under a certain dollar amount and in California, that they could only speak if they were given prior notices of 30 days. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd sure like to know for sure exactly what I'm going to be doing 30 days from now. I think it is important to increase the interaction between the board and constituents. And I think if this action item, the second part, is approved, I think it would have the exact opposite. Now, being a CPA, if cost is the reason for the suggested change, then I would set a cap to the total amount any board member can spend in any year on out-of-state conferences, education, speaking engagements. I know that a lot of elected board members join the respective, like, for example, RPEA or CSR, but I don't think that they should be paying if one of the board members comes to speak on behalf of the board. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, the next.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Next, we have Mr. Al Darby.
First, Mr. Chair, committee members, Al Darby, RPEA. I believe that Mr. Fechner was about to make a motion that would have satisfied the issues that I have. I'd like to hear the motion so as to know exactly what might be voted upon as opposed to not knowing in the current condition we're in. Thank you. I'll hang on.
Okay, that's a good point. Why don't we refer back to that, Mr. Fechner, so that the audience know exactly what they'll be speaking to. Mr. Fechner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I move approval of the policy revision, except in section B, to take out where it says requires approval, to put in requires prior acknowledgement to the president. So making sure the president knows ahead of time what the travel is. So if there's any questions, the president could reach out and question why you are going somewhere. But again, this is not about Mr. Jones. It's about the president, whoever it will be. And we want to make sure that we keep things above board. So I think with transparency, with prior acknowledgement of what the travel is going to be, I think instead of the word approval, I think that works for me. And I agree with the reporting requirement that we should be giving that report so that it can be posted so the constituents can see where we went, what we did, and why we did it, and what we learned from it. I think that's all very important. I just think that that word approval is causing a lot of angst. And if we just have prior acknowledgement or something along those lines, that it's much better served. Thank you.
Okay, do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been second. Okay, so now we can go back to the speakers. Who's next, Mr. Kelly?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to return Al Darby.
Okay.
I'm satisfied with what I heard Mr. Fechner make a motion for. So I'll sign off at this point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, the next public comment comes from Tim Behrens.
Good morning, President Jones, committee members. Tim Behrens, President of the California State Retirees. I support this amendment just made. I don't think that board members should have to charge their expenses to constituent groups that they may belong to when they're invited to talk on CalPERS business. Over the past 6 years, several past board members, as well as current board members, including President Jones, Lisa Middleton, Margaret Brown, Jason Perez, David Miller, and Rob Fechner have attended CSR chapter meetings as a guest speaker. They have given an overview of CalPERS pension investments and current health care benefits and answered questions about the quality of service received from CalPERS. This information has been invaluable to thousands of CSR members who do not attend board and committee meetings. I believe it also gives the board members some insight into what the stakeholders have on their mind regarding the service received from CalPERS. Changing this language could have a detrimental effect on continuing the very valuable exchange between board members and stakeholders. I do support all the additional language under F, 5F, procedures for board members to provide a written as well as a verbal feedback for all other travel. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Stay safe.
Okay. Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Chair, next up we have Mr. J.J. Jelensik.
If Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Jones do not believe that the issue as presented does not impact constituent groups, then I would suggest that they didn't read C3. Speaking on behalf of RPA, we do not want the board, let alone the board president acting on his own bias, to tell us which board members can and cannot speak at our chapters. No matter how you got on the board, you have a legal obligation to
represent our interests, and we want the ability to invite you to speak at our meetings and to question you. Amendment to a notification rather than approval addresses part of that. On a personal level, when I first was elected to the board, there was no limit on travel. I was responsible for the 500 registration limit within California. And it came about because I wanted to go to an event with a $1,700 registration fee, and I wanted more than just my opinion on its value. After all, it's a trust. I know about secret charges and secret so-called hearings. I know about being denied the opportunity to publicly defend myself. Even when the board acted to punish Priya Mathur, it was in open session, it was by the full board, not the president acting in secret, and it was over multiple violations of FPPC regulations. Even then, we did not restrict travel to constituent groups. To limit constituents' access to their trustees is to punish the members. It is not the action a trust should be taking. Beneficiaries deserve to meet with their fiduciaries. It should not take a court order to meet with a trustee. I urge you to reject the changes in C3. Do not adopt this, which limits members' rights. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Chair, next we have Larry Woodson from CSR.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Larry Woodson, California State Retirees, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee and you, Mr. Chair. My comments have suddenly gotten a lot shorter. I think Mr. Fechner's proposal and move is a good one. I happen to agree with my president, and that removes the required prior approval. Just a comment about the statement that denying travel does not necessarily mean people can't go meet with their constituents since they can do it at their own expense. I don't think that all board members are equally rich, and it I think does create a hardship on some, and I think it would be a disincentive. So I would just urge the board to approve that amendment and not require prior chair approval for items under 500 or travel under $500. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, next. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Kelly?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the final commenter, Mr. Ray Snodgrass, CAL FIRE Local 2881.
Good morning, Mr. President. Ray Snodgrass, CAL FIRE firefighters, representing the active and retired members. With the amended proposal, the motion by Mr. Fechner, I do support the proposed change. And I also would like to reflect on Mr. Jelinsk's comments that the changes proposed are actually very unnecessary. I would suggest that if you do approve this policy change, that at least Mr. Fechner's motion be approved. But I would also suggest that this entire policy go back to staff to rework it and work with the constituent groups, the stakeholders, and maybe come up with some more acceptable language. It'd be less confusing. Thank you, and I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Mr. Fechner and a second by Miss Brown.
I have
Can
a
I
comment.
just ask
Okay.
to clarify? Oh, you're taking comments on this?
Yeah, I see one
Okay.
more question from Ms.
All
Brown
right,
then.
good.
Thank you, President Jones. Based on the comments I heard, well, first I want to reply to a concern that Ms. Taylor had about what we call in finance and accounting double dipping. You cannot, it's illegal for you to be reimbursed by, say, your association and by CalPERS. It's illegal to be reimbursed by your employer and CalPERS. So that better not be happening at all. So it's illegal. The second thing I'd like to say that in light of the state's financial crisis and with our less than adequate funding status, I'd like to see us adopt a cap on our travel until such time as we can do better. I mean, we're going to be asking our employees to take furlough days or somehow cut back on the budget. And I think we as board members should also, suffer a little and look at putting a cap on our travel expenses as well. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Jacobs.
In the interest of clarity,
Mr.
and the
Jacobs.
hope that we can just do this by interlineation if the motion is approved and not have to bring back additional language, let me try and restate Mr. Fechner's motion. On page 2 of 5 of agenda item 5A, attachment 1, the motion is to replace under item 2 the language approval by the board president with the language requires notice to, so that the entire paragraph would read, board member travel within California and attendance at any event within California with a registration fee less than $500 requires notice to the board president or in his absence, and then it goes on. Is that the motion, Mr. Fechner?
I would say, Mr. Jacobs, that it would be requires prior notice or prior notification. So it's before the action and it's written in that word prior so that it's prior notification to the president and or vice president to allow them to ask further questions if need be as whether or not it's something that should or should not be a CalPERS expense. But either way, I think taking out approval by and replacing that with prior notification makes a big change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Oliveris.
Thank you. And how would prior notification be defined? Is that something that's 5 minutes beforehand? Is it 24 hours?
Well, if you're asking the maker of the motion, I don't think any of us do anything within 24 hours these days. So I would think that, a 2-week prior notification, unless it's an emergency. And if it's an emergency, then you express that to the president or vice president.
Thank you. I think this needs to go back for additional clarification. I think that there are a lot of concerns about this right now, and I think there's some confusion regarding the language that continues.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Because we do have a motion on the floor. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I was hoping for maybe a friendly amendment to the motion that says in B3 that says excluding meetings with constituents, because it doesn't say it there. You have to go to F to find that. The other thing is, I don't think 2 weeks works. Sometimes we get invited last minute. A speaker fell through at a local chapter and they ask you to come speak and you fill in and give the CalPERS update. You can pull those right off of Diligent. You can take like Lisa Middleton's last speech to whatever, and you can take it, modify it, and go. And so, and that's a lot of times what I do. I help out the chapters when their DMV speaker or their Social Security speaker dropped out. So I think 2 weeks is a hardship for me. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Ms. Taylor?
I just, thank you very much, Mr. President. I think we should, I'm not sure that this needs to go back. It's simple. We're just asking for prior notification. Come on, people, you're traveling for CalPERS, but you're also traveling on the state of California's dime. The 2 weeks notice is not a big deal. And if you work for the state of California, that's not a big deal. So let's be clear, that's not a hardship. We're just asking you to give us prior notification. If you have an urgent thing, I have to travel tomorrow, call Henry or call whoever the president is. I don't think they're going to turn you down, but and if in any event, I think we're making too big of a deal out of a few small changes, one of which was requested by our constituents. So I think we should move forward with this.
Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote with that understanding of the modifications, and many of some of the comments relate to areas that did not change. They've been there all along, like the 30-day prior notice. That's not new. That's always been in the policy. And I think it's also important to clarify that in my earlier statement, I did say constituents were all members of CalPERS. So it's all constituents. It's not just who you are elected by. So with that, I'm going to call for the vote. Ms. Hopper, would you call the roll, please, on the motion by Mr. Hopper and the second by Ms. Milton?
Okay. Rob Peckner,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
Stacy Oliveris,
Nay.
Michelle Mitchell for Irena Ortega, Jason Perez.
No.
Mr. President, I have Rob Beckner making the motion, Lisa Middleton second it. I have 4 ayes and 2 nays.
Okay, you have 4?
4 yes and 2 noes.
Okay, so it passes. Okay, the item passes. Okay, so we now will move to the next item on the agenda. I could find my notes here.
It's a summary of committee direction,
Yeah,
Mr.
okay.
President, which I don't believe there has been any, so we get to public comment.
Yeah, and so are there any further public comments, not on the item we just passed, Mr. Fox?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe we have Mr. Al Darby would like to add public comment.
Okay.
Al Darby, again, I believe that it's a strict reading of the wording of this obligation. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Are you hearing me? Okay.
I can hear you.
A strict reading of the language in this proposal says any fee registration event that a board member attends, all these rules apply. If there's no fee involved, none of these rules apply, except for what the old rules were, I would think, because this whole event, this whole new proposal hinges on it being a fee-based event. Lacking a fee, the rule does not apply. That would be a strict reading of the way it's written. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other general public comments, Mr. Fox, other than on the item we just had the discussion on? Okay, so
No, Mr. Chair, that concludes the public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. So that means that this meeting is adjourned, and we will now have to give them time to prepare the documents from this meeting to go into the regular board. So why don't we, what time is it now? It's 11:40. Why don't we just go ahead and, do you mind taking an early lunch? You don't mind? Okay. So let's go ahead and do lunch, and we'll return at 12:45. Start the board meeting. Is that okay? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
At what time, Henry?
12:45.
Oh, lunchtime. So we're doing
Yeah, we're
lunch.
gonna take
Okay.
lunch. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.